Norway's rivers are growing silent. The wild salmon, once the beating heart of these waters, is vanishing. But who is to blame? Nature, climate change, or human greed? Stay with us as we uncover the untold truth behind crisis threatening Norway's most iconic fish. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Zimo Voice for more deep stories that the world needs to hear. In the icy waters of Norway, a place where fjords cut deep into land and snow often blankets the mountains, even in late spring, something extraordinary is happening. A team of divers, bundled in heavy dry suits, lowers themselves into a river so cold that most people would not dare to dip even a hand into it. At first glance, this seems an unlikely place for humans to be. But these divers are not adventurers or thrill seekers. They are scientists working under the direction of the Norwegian government. Their mission is one of urgency and importance: to count the wild Atlantic salmon. The timing of their work is deliberate. It is the beginning of the spawning season, a moment in the natural calendar when salmon should be pushing upstream in great numbers, swimming tirelessly against the current in their instinctive drive to return to their natal rivers. For centuries, this has been one of nature's most awe-inspiring migrations, a return home against the odds, where salmon complete the cycle of life by laying their eggs in the same gravel beds where they were born. But something is wrong. Where once the rivers teemed with countless silver bodies, leaping, splashing, and writhing in shallow pools, now the waters are eerily quiet. A few solitary fish dart here and there, but the schools, the dense gatherings of salmon that should be here, are absent. The divers take notes, communicate with hand signals, and search every pool and every tributary. The more they search, the more worried they become. Helge Skogland, an aquatic biologist who has spent decades studying these rivers, cannot hide his concern. "The low numbers I'm seeing make me worried," he admits soberly. "It seems likely that our spawning targets will not be reached. That means there will not be enough salmon to secure the stability of the population in the long term." His voice, calm but heavy, reflects a crisis that many in Norway feel in their bones. For the people of Norway, salmon is not just another fish. It is woven into the national identity, celebrated in culture, cuisine, and tradition. Families once gathered at riverbanks to fish. Entire villages depended on salmon runs for food and trade. And even today, anglers see catching a wild salmon as one of the greatest thrills in the natural world. But now this cherished fish, the pride of Norway's waters, is at risk of becoming a shadow of its former abundance. The causes of this decline are many, but among them one problem looms larger than most: factory farming. Over the past half-century, Norway has become the world's largest producer of farmed salmon. Rows of open net cages float in its fjords, each cage holding tens of thousands of fish. From the outside, these cages look like harmless rings bobbing on the surface of the water. But inside them lurks a problem that scientists say has become catastrophic: the outbreak of parasites known as salmon lice. These tiny, almost invisible creatures attach themselves to salmon, feeding on their skin, mucus, and blood. In small numbers, they might not seem alarming, but in the crowded, unnatural conditions of fish farms, their numbers explode into infestations that spread far beyond the cages, infecting wild salmon as they swim past. The lice gnaw through flesh, leaving open wounds, disfiguring fins, and draining the energy of the fish until many cannot survive the journey back to their rivers. Environmentalists describe it as an epidemic. Some even call it an ecological tragedy unfolding in slow motion, one that is killing not only individual fish, but the very future of salmon as a wild species in Norway. The divers in the river's surface and shake their heads. The count are low, dangerously low. Helge Skogland gathers a team at the bank, their breath steaming in the frosty Norwegian air. "We've checked every section," he says, "and in some pools, not a single salmon." Silence falls over the group. They know what this means. If these numbers continue to drop, entire rivers may have to be closed to fishing for years, perhaps permanently. The reality is stark. Each year, scientists like Helge conduct these salmon counts in more than 200 rivers across Norway. These data points are crucial. They determine which rivers remain open for recreational fishing and which must be placed under strict bans. In 2024, for example, The Environment Ministry had no choice but to temporarily ban salmon fishing in more than 30 rivers. For many communities, it was a painful blow. Fishing isn't just a pastime here. It is part of the rhythm of life, a heritage that connects generations. But the protection of the species must come first. And yet, as Helga points out, the real danger doesn't lurk in the rivers themselves. The greatest threat lies further out, in the fjords and along Norway's rugged coastlines. Here, hundreds upon hundreds of salmon farms line the waters. Each one is an industrial operation, producing fish not for local tables, but for the global market. Norway exports over 1 million tons of salmon each year, making it the largest producer in the world. Walk into a supermarket in Europe, America, or Asia, and the odds are high that the salmon fillet you see behind the counter came from one of these cages in Norway. But this success has come at a terrible cost. The open net design of these farms allows seawater to flow freely through the cages. With it flow fish waste, uneaten feed, chemicals, and above all, parasites like the dreaded salmon lice. In these crowded pens, parasites thrive, reproducing at explosive rates. From there, they spread outward, drifting on currents, clinging to any wild salmon unlucky enough to pass by. For the farmed salmon, the infestations are treated with chemicals, lasers, and mechanical cleaning devices. For the wild salmon, there is no such protection. They are simply overwhelmed. Al von Luza, chairman of the Norwegian Hunting and Fishing Association, has been one of the most vocal critics of this industry. Sitting in his modest office, he pulls up video footage on his laptop. The images are harrowing. Trout caught during a school fishing trip, their skin torn raw, their fins ragged, their bodies covered with lice. These pictures make me sad, he says softly, shaking his head. No fish should suffer like this. He pauses and adds bitterly, if the fish inside the farms looked like this, it would be an economic disaster. Nobody would buy them. But because the wild fish bear the scars, the problem is ignored. Indeed, research suggests that at some point during the year, nearly every farmed salmon, up to 100%, will be infested with lice. Some die, others survive but carry the parasites into the surrounding environment. It is, as many scientists describe, a perfect breeding ground for disaster. The issue is not new. Fish farms have been operating in Norway for nearly half a century, and the same problems that plague the industry then are still here now. Lice, pollution, and escaped fish that mingle with wild populations. In fact, in many ways, the situation is worse than ever before. With rising sea temperatures caused by climate change, parasites reproduce faster, and with Norway's production levels higher than ever, the scale of the threat has multiplied beyond measure. To understand the depth of the crisis, one must visit Bergen, Norway's second largest city, a picturesque port wrapped in misty hills and dotted with colorful wooden houses that date back to the Hanseatic era. Bergen has long been the heart of Norway's fishing culture. For centuries, fishermen here braved storms in small boats to bring cod, herring, and salmon back to the harbor. Today, it remains a hub, but the scene has changed. At the famous fish market, traders set up their counters early each morning. Crushed ice glistens under the lights, displaying rows of gleaming fish. Cod, halibut, monkfish, and of course, salmon. Customers, locals and tourists alike, stop to admire the abundance. Yet behind the display lies an uneasy truth. Almost every salmon sold here is farmed. 90% to be exact. The reason is simple. Wild salmon is now too rare, too expensive, and often unavailable. The season for wild salmon is very short, explains fishmonger Marius Angerag. Maybe 2 months a year if the rivers are open, but lately, many rivers have been closed completely, so we depend almost entirely on farmed fish. For Marius, selling farmed salmon is simply part of his livelihood. Yet standing nearby, Al von Luza, the Fishing Association chairman, shakes his head. He can instantly spot the difference between farmed and wild salmon. The wild salmon eats shrimp, krill, and small crustaceans. That's what gives it the deep, natural red color, he says, picking up a fillet with practiced eyes. Farmed salmon doesn't have that diet. The color you see is artificial. They add pigments to the feed, almost like food coloring, to make it look right. He points out another difference too. The texture. Wild salmon muscle is firm, powerful, built by years of migration through rivers and oceans. Farmed salmon, raised in crowded cages, often has what he calls a gelatinous consistency. For the discerning angler, the difference is striking, but perhaps the most alarming impact of farming isn't visible at the counter. It lies in genetics. Marius recounts times when escaped farm fish ended up in his nets. We've caught rainbow trout from farms, sometimes even salmon that clearly weren't wild, he says. The problem is, when they escape, they can breed with wild salmon or trout. That mixes up the genetics and ruins the natural population. It's a hidden danger, not as obvious as parasite or pollution, but just as destructive. Norway's wild salmon populations are each genetically unique to their river. For thousands of years, natural selection tailored each group to its specific environment. When farm fish mix in, those adaptations can be lost forever. This interbreeding, combined with lice infestations and waste from farms, has left environmentalists increasingly alarmed. Some even call it the slow erosion of Norway's natural heritage. Yet despite years of warnings, the industry has grown larger, richer, and more powerful, its influence reaching deep into politics and policymaking. And while critics raise their voices, the farms remain reluctant to engage. For months, journalists requested interviews with salmon producers. Most declined. A few issued brief statements emphasizing their commitment to sustainability, but offered little detail. The silence itself speaks volumes. Finally, one company agreed to talk. In a small town 1,000 kilometers north of Bergen, a different approach is being tried. Here, fish farmer Thomas Muir and his team developed a system that challenges the standard open net cages. Instead, they use closed containers, sealed bags that float on the sea, but remain isolated from it. These tanks draw water not from the surface, where parasites thrive, but from deeper, colder layers of the ocean. Standing on the deck of the facility, Thomas gestures to the enormous structures beside him. Our salmon have been here almost a year, he explains. Next week, we begin harvesting. These fish will be shipped across Europe and the world. Each tank holds up to 90,000 salmon, each weighing between 5 and 6 kilograms a harvest. But unlike the farms near Bergen, Thomas insists his salmon are parasite-free. Our tanks are sealed, he says firmly. The lice can't get in. And we don't release lice into the sea either. That's the difference. The system is not simple. It requires constant pumping of water from 25 meters below the surface, 24 hours a day. A command center monitors oxygen levels, temperature, and flow. Waste, uneaten feed, fish excrement, and even dead fish is collected through pipes at the bottom and processed on land. Some becomes biogas, others fertilizer. Nothing is dumped into fjord. It is, in many ways, a model of what sustainable salmon farming could look like. Yet it remains an exception, not the rule. The industry as a whole has shown little appetite for the heavy investment such systems require. Most farms remain open net cages, continuing the cycle of lice, pollution, and genetic contamination. Back on the rivers, Helge and his team continue their counts. What they find is heartbreaking. In one river where hundreds of salmon once surged upstream, they now find only 25 fish. This is one of the lowest years we've ever recorded, Helge admits. He knows what this means. The river will likely be closed to fishing, perhaps for years. For anglers like Alv, this is a bitter reality. Fishing for salmon is not just recreation. It is a connection to nature, a rite of passage, a way of life. There's nothing like it, he says, recalling the struggle of reeling in a powerful fish. The salmon fights hard. It's a battle between man and nature, pure and exhilarating. But now, more often than not, that experience is slipping away. At one of Norway's remote rivers, a hatchery stands as a beacon of hope. Here, scientists and conservationists are fighting back against the decline. Their work is part science, part devotion, and part desperation. The process begins during spawning season, when researchers catch adult salmon returning from the sea. It's a delicate task, not for sport but for survival. Each captured fish is carefully examined, weighed, and identified. The most crucial step is determining whether the salmon is wild-born or hatchery-raised. At the hatchery, biologist Inga Sandvin demonstrates the procedure. holding a shimmering 4-kilogram fish. He checks for a microchip under its skin. The scanner remains silent. This one, it turns out, is wild. That's good, he says. It means the natural population is still here, still returning. But their numbers are small, far too small. Next, a tiny sample of scales is removed and sealed in an envelope. Under a microscope, the growth rings on the scales can reveal the fish's age, its time at sea, and even its overall health. It's like reading the tree rings of the ocean. The females are stripped of their eggs, which are then fertilized with milk from males. The process is controlled, precise, and above all, designed to maximize survival. In the wild, perhaps only a fraction of eggs would ever become adult salmon. In the hatchery, the goal is to give as many as possible a fighting chance. In large circular tanks, thousands of young salmon, tiny, darting fry, swim endlessly. At 7 months old, they are strong but fragile. Soon, they will be released into the river, embarking on the perilous journey to the sea. The hope is that at least a handful will survive, mature, and return to this very river in a few years to spawn again. But Inga is sober in his assessment. Many of these won't come back, he admits. The lice in the sea are devastating. Even a few parasites can kill a young salmon. And then there's climate change, warming waters, changing currents. Their odds are stacked against them. Norway's rivers face another threat: hydropower. The country is proud of its clean energy, but the dams and power plants that regulate rivers have unintended consequences. Water levels rise and fall unpredictably, disorienting the salmon and making their spawning runs far more difficult. For a species that relies on instinct and memory to return to the exact river of its birth, these disruptions can be fatal. Each river, scientists stress, holds a genetically unique strain of salmon. To lose one river's population is to lose a lineage that has existed for millennia, adapted perfectly to its specific environment. That loss cannot be undone. The battle to save them has brought scientists, anglers, and environmentalists together, but it has also set them against powerful forces, the salmon farming industry and its lobby. While hatcheries work tirelessly to preserve wild fish, the open net farms continue releasing parasites and waste into the same waters. It is in many ways a battle of survival, wild against farm, nature against industry. At the Marine Research Institute in Bergen, scientists study salmon lice under controlled conditions. In tanks of seawater, they raise salmon infested with parasites, examining every detail of their life cycle. If you look closely, researcher Ewan Carlson says, pointing to the fish, you can see the lice behind the dorsal fin. They're small, flat, with egg strands trailing like threads. Each strand contains 150 eggs. Within 10 days, they hatch. And 10 days after that, more hatch. It's exponential. The numbers are staggering. A single female louse can lead to thousands of offspring in a matter of weeks. In crowded farms where tens of thousands of fish swim side by side, the parasites spread like wildfire. And once they exist in such numbers, wild salmon passing nearby stand little chance. To fight back, scientists are exploring vaccines, new treatments, and stricter regulations. Norway uses what is called a traffic light system, a regulatory framework that determines whether salmon farming in a region can expand, must be reduced, or can remain steady. The system is based on mortality rates. If more than 30% of wild salmon smolts are expected to die due to lice infestations, the area is designated red, and farms are forced to reduce production. The industry hates it. Lawsuits have already been filed against the government's restrictions. Billions of euros are at stake. And as climate change warms the seas, lice infestations are only getting worse. Early studies suggest that in 2024, the number of lice doubled yet again. Meanwhile, innovators like Thomas Muir continue to push closed systems as a solution, but adoption remains slow. Norway has more than 1,000 licenses for traditional open net farms, licenses granted decades ago. Few new licenses are issued, and without government pressure, most producers see little reason to change. For fishermen like Al von Luza, this is a bitter pill. He remembers the 1970s and 80s, when rivers were full of wild salmon, when catching one was both thrilling and ordinary. Now, to serve a wild salmon at dinner is almost a luxury, a symbol of what has been lost. At his home, Al prepares such a fish, proud to serve to his guests. They marvel at the deep red color, the firm texture, the taste of something natural and rare. Yet even in this joy, there is sadness. Why can't they farm fish without destroying the environment? One guest asked aloud. Why must profit come at the expense of nature? The question lingers unanswered as the salmon bakes in the oven. Norway finds itself at a crossroads. On one hand, it is celebrated globally as an environmental leader, a nation powered largely by renewable energy, boasting pristine fjords and a reputation for harmony with nature. On the other, it is the world's largest producer of farmed salmon, an industry worth billions, feeding markets across Europe, Asia, and North America. This dual identity creates a deep contradiction. Can a country truly claim to be green while its own rivers lose their iconic species? Can it champion sustainability while allowing parasites, pollution, and genetic damage to spread through its waters? Inside government buildings in Oslo, the debate rages. Ministers of fisheries defend the industry, pointing to its economic importance. Salmon farming provides thousands of jobs in coastal towns, many of which have few other opportunities. In some villages, the local farm is a lifeline, keeping schools open and shops running. To shut them down would mean unemployment, depopulation, and collapse. But environmentalists argue that this short-term lifeline comes at a long-term cost. We are destroying our natural inheritance, says Alvon Luza during a meeting with policymakers. Our grandchildren may never see wild salmon if this continues. What kind of legacy is that? The divide is not just ecological, it is cultural. Fishing has always been part of Norway's soul. The rivers are sacred spaces, where fathers taught sons to cast their first line, where stories of the one that got away were passed from generation to generation. For many Norwegians, the thought of losing salmon is not simply about food or economics. It is about identity. Meanwhile, on the global stage, Norway's salmon has become a prized commodity. From sushi restaurants in Tokyo to high-end supermarkets in Paris, Norwegian salmon is sold as a symbol of purity, quality, and Nordic nature. Few consumers know or care whether the fish was raised in an open-net pen or swam wild through the rivers. The marketing image, clean fjords, rugged fishermen, icy waters, remains strong. Yet cracks are showing. Environmental groups across Europe have begun campaigning against farmed salmon, releasing shocking images of lice-infested fish and polluted fjords. Some supermarkets in Germany and the UK have faced boycotts, pressure to label their salmon more transparently. In France, chefs debate whether wild should be the only salmon worthy of fine dining. And then there's climate change, the great amplifier of every problem. Warming seas fuel parasite growth, disrupt migration patterns, and weaken the resilience of wild populations. Scientists warn that without drastic changes, some rivers could lose their salmon entirely within decades. The Norwegian government finds itself caught between powerful lobbies. The salmon industry insists on expansion, pointing to growing global demand. Environmentalists demand stricter regulations, even closures of entire regions. Local communities stand in the middle, dependent on jobs but fearful of losing the rivers that define them. In recent years, the traffic light system has become the flashpoint of this struggle. Green zones allow farms to grow, yellow zones freeze production, and red zones demand reductions. But industry players argue that the system is unfair. Based on estimates they claim exaggerate the impact of lice. They have filed lawsuits, delaying restrictions and undermining trust in the process. As one researcher from the Marine Institute put it bluntly, "We are in a race against time. Every year we delay, more wild salmon die. Every year the industry resists, the rivers grow emptier." Despite this, innovation continues. In hidden laboratories, teams work tirelessly to develop vaccines against lice, while engineers test new closed systems, offshore farms, and even land-based tanks. Some believe that within a generation, all salmon farming will move away from the open sea. Others fear that by then, it will already be too late for the wild salmon. For now, the story remains unresolved. The rivers still flow, but with fewer fish. The farms still operate, but under growing scrutiny. And the people in Norway still struggle with the question, Can a nation built on nature allow its most iconic species to vanish? As the debate grows louder in government halls and international conferences, ordinary Norwegians feel the weight of the crisis in their daily lives. On the banks of rivers once filled with salmon, silence now reigns. Anglers who used to spend their summers by the water now speak of emptiness, of long days waiting, with no fish on the line. For them, it's not just about catching dinner. It's about a bond with the natural world that seems to be slipping away. Older generations recall a different Norway. In the 1970s and 80s, wild salmon seemed endless. Families could catch enough to smoke for the winter, and the rivers echoed with life. Today, that memory feels like a relic of another age, a golden era fading fast. The government faces a painful contradiction. On the international stage, Norway is a champion of sustainability, clean energy, and environmental responsibility. Yet within its own borders, the clash between industry and nature tells another story. The salmon industry has become so vast, so profitable, that its shadow stretches far. Lobbyists shape policy, lawsuits delay reforms, and entire communities depend on jobs that bind them to the very system causing the damage. Globally, the stakes are just as high. Norway exports over 1 million tons of salmon each year. From New York to Shanghai, millions of people eat Norwegian salmon without knowing, or perhaps without wanting to know, the story behind it. The glossy advertisements show pristine fjords and smiling fishermen, but they do not show the lice-ravaged trout, the polluted seabeds, or the empty rivers. Meanwhile, the ecological clock ticks on. Climate change continues to warm the oceans, fueling parasites and stressing fish populations. Scientists warn that unless drastic measures are taken, entire river systems could see their salmon populations collapse beyond recovery. If that happens, it will not just be a Norwegian tragedy. It will be the erasure of a species that has symbolized endurance, strength, and migration for centuries. And yet, in the middle of all this, sparks of hope remain. In small hatcheries, dedicated teams of scientists and volunteers work to give salmon a fighting chance. In research institutes, new methods are being tested: vaccines, closed systems, land-based tanks. And in homes across Norway, fishermen like Alv and his wife Tova continue to treasure the wild salmon they do catch, serving it not just as food, but as a reminder of what is at stake. The struggle has become more than ecological. It is moral. Should profit outweigh the survival of the species? Should short-term economic gain outweigh centuries of cultural heritage? And perhaps most importantly, can humanity find a balance between feeding the world and preserving the natural order that sustains it? As Alv serves as guest the salmon he caught, he says quietly, "This fish is rare now, too rare. If we do not change, one day we will sit here with empty plates, telling stories about how the rivers once flowed with salmon. And that will be all that remains, stories." It is a haunting thought, because the story of Norway's salmon is not just about fish. It is about the choices we make as a society, the values we hold, and the future we leave for those who come after us. And so, the rivers of Norway flow on, quieter, emptier, but not yet silent. The question is whether humanity will act in time to ensure that wild salmon still leap against the currents in generations to come, or whether they will fade into memory. Another casualty of greed, neglect, and delay. Viewers, what do you think? Can Norway and the world find a way to balance industry with nature, or are we watching the slow disappearance of one of the planet's most iconic fish? Write your thoughts in the comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Zimo Voice for more powerful stories like this.